Let's bring in Andy Preston, who's a political commentator, former Mayor of Middlesbrough. Good afternoon to you.
Hello, David. Hi, everyone.
Hi, really good to talk to you this afternoon. I mean, we were saying that the Labour government really hasn't been in power very long. The new poll, that mega poll, looks pretty awful reading, or makes very awful reading for the Labour Party. Just in terms of that, let me ask you the question I'm asking everyone. What is the biggest threat to Labour? Is it their lack of direction, misguided policies, the pressure of reform or the Conservative Party? Or is it just really upsetting core groups, core demographics, like the farmers?
Good question. I think there are several massive threats to Labour right now. It isn't the Tory party right now. It could be, of course, in 2 or 3 months if they get their act together and come up with some policies and unite behind a leader. But right now, I would say the biggest single threat to Labour in the medium term is the economy. Everything they've done, everything they've promised was about the economy. The budget is predicated on the economy. If we don't get growth, and by the way, I'm sorry to give you an unseasonal message, but I think we've probably already slipped into recession. Yeah. If that's true, if the economy doesn't grow, we're knackered. And categorically, Rachel Reeves and Labour have two choices. They either come back and put taxes up again, or they start slashing services. Either of which will make them deeply, deeply unpopular. So I would say the economy is their biggest single risk right now. But reform are breathing down their necks in a load of council areas. Reform obviously targeting, I think Kent is the one they're deemed to be most likely to do well in, but there'll be a range of places across Wales and England where reform do really well and get that ground, feet on the ground, to get some foot soldiers in local council seats, and they create that start to create that infrastructure that's needed for power in Westminster.
I think you're right. I think Kent, Essex, Medway towns, those are obviously key battlegrounds for reform. Also, you mentioned Wales. That's really interesting. Scotland is another one to watch as well. Just the change in direction, political direction of those people who live in Scotland and Wales. Just in terms of this, I wonder what is going through Keir Starmer's mind. And can I just ask you about this? Well, let's just start with the economy for a start. So we saw in Q1 and Q2 there was a growth in the economy. Q3 we flatlined. Q4, as you say, currently shrinking, no growth between July and September. Rachel Reeves says, oh, we've made all the difficult decisions. We had this £20 billion black hole which no one else can find. And then we doubled that. So we then borrowed we levied taxes of £40 billion. But you're right. If they come back and say we need even more money, and coupled to that, there is also this strange kind of thought process where they say middle-class parents are welcoming VAT being levied on private schools. A, that's not true. B, it's fanciful. And C, I don't know where she got it from.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been thinking long and hard about the whole schools thing, David. And I suppose if you ask middle-class parents whose kids are in state schools, do they want parents of kids in private schools to pay more tax? They probably think yes. If you said to me, do you want the rest of the restaurant to pay for your meal tonight, or part of it, I'd say yes, of course I would. If they ask middle-class parents with kids at private schools, they get a very different answer. So I think the nature of the question that Rachel Reeves and Bridget Phillipson have been asking is skewing a certain answer, so I would disregard it.
But also, if they've done their homework, when you look that you've got 500,000 kids in private schools, which basically saves the state £4.5 billion, and then they say, well, we're going to actually get £1.5 billion in. Well, yes, but it doesn't take into account the numbers, the sheer numbers of kids who are being privately educated currently, going into the state system, which, as Charlie says, they're already paying for.
Totally. There are huge risks in Labour's assumption here, and that's how I know for certain, and I'm rarely certain of anything, but I'm certain that this was ideological. It was designed specifically to arouse the excitement amongst the left wing of the Labour Party that really hate private schools. Because, of course, if Labour wanted to raise £1.7 billion and put that into state schools, which may be a brilliant thing to do, by the way, I'm not against that, the only way to do that with certainty is to put that in income tax. Income tax is the safest, surest way to raise money, and the fairest.
So why didn't they do that?
Because they didn't want to raise the £1.7 billion. What they want to do is be seen to be penalising those that send their kids to private school. That's the whole point of this. If it was really about funding state schools, they could have put income tax up for the richest by a penny or something like that.
Can I just throw that to Charlie? Charlie, yeah. If they'd levied with the public and said, look, we need to invest in state schools, I think everyone would agree with that. We want everyone to have a world-class education. We want people to be great at maths and English, all those things. And if they'd said, right, a penny on income tax across the board, we're going to have brilliant state schools, I actually don't think many people would have complained.
I think that's right. And I think Andy's absolutely right, because the way in which the communication has been laid out is to say, oh, the reason why we're doing this in the private school sector is because we've got to fund. There's an underfunding problem with our state schools. So if you're just making that direct comparison or that direct link between the two, the idea that when in the next budget, you know, the Education Secretary or the Chancellor then need to say, oh, actually, we need a bit more money. Well, hold on. You've already taxed us out of the private school sector. And in doing so, by the way, those pushy parents, those middle-class parents who send their kids to state schools, I don't think they'll be best pleased when they then have their kid in a class full of 35 plus, maybe, because it's an over now inflated classrooms in terms of their sizes. So the idea that the government have said we're doing this to pay for our state schools, I think they've boxed themselves in, and they can't raise income tax because, as I say, during the general election, they said that they wouldn't raise VAT, national insurance,
well, they did say that about national insurance as well. Just coming back to you, Andy, if I may, one of the other things that Charlie and I were talking about is the farmers. Now, farmers, by their very nature, are hard-working. They're very angry about what is going on. And I don't really know how the government has arrived at this idea or this realisation, or what they say is the truth, that it only affects a very small number of farms, 500 farms, just in terms of the capping of the agricultural property relief. Most farmers I talk to say that's utter nonsense, because farms are asset rich and cash poor. But when you start to see farmers mobilise, which they're talking about doing on the 25th of January, and when you don't have food security in this country, when there is no food on the shelves, that will be a major problem for the government.
Completely. If the farmers rebel, if the farmers rise up and do even 20% of what, say, the French farmers do, and has happened across other parts of Europe, we will see huge support for the farmers from the general public. That farming is one of those occupations, vocations that the public respects and our culture treasures. It's like being a nurse or something else. And people will be behind them. The farmers could be a monstrous thorn in the government side. And I mean, I'm sat right now actually in Rishi Sunak's constituency in the heart of rural North Yorkshire. I mix with a lot of farmers. They toil and toil and toil. They're working small to medium-sized family farms that actually, as a book valuation, if they were to be sold, would be worth quite a lot of money, but they don't generate a lot of income for them. And part of the benefit of doing that for them, that keeps them going, apart from the love of the job, is the idea that although I don't earn a lot, I can pass on a lot of this to my kids without there being a significant inheritance tax bill. If you take that away, you remove their motivation for doing it.
Well, I mean, the government will push back and say, well, you know, if you bequeath the farm 7 years before you die, you then would not have to pay that inheritance tax. I was trying to explain to someone the other day why it's not that straightforward.
It's not that straightforward. There are lots of reasons, not least because, of course, you might not be ready to hand over. You legally cannot bequeath an asset and then still control it. So that would mean you have to exit from it completely. So someone in their late 40s or 50s would have to exit from that business completely and not run it. Is your kid ready, or your children ready to step in and do it? Are they able to step in and do it at that point? And what about actually trying to get the timing of that right, where you've definitely got at least 7 years of life left? It's full of holes. I think that, understandably, look, the Jeremy Clarksons, the Dysons, who have bought huge amounts of land in order to avoid tax. It's a tax avoidance trade tactic. I totally understand that loophole should be closed. But the family farmer who's toiled and whose family have toiled for generations, and they're working 200, 250 acres, they barely scratch a living, to place more pressure on them and make them feel even more unloved and supported is going to bite the government. They're going to rise up, and if and when they do, the public will be with them.
Can I just ask you finally, if I may, what about the Labour Party itself? Coming back after the break over Christmas and New Year, there will be a lot of very nervous members of Parliament from the Labour Party who will be exerting pressure on the leadership team. I wonder whether you have any thoughts about Keir Starmer's position.
I think his position is very vulnerable. I think it was on this station I was talking to Peter Cardwell about 3 months ago, and I said I didn't think Keir Starmer would see out his full term, and Peter was like, really? And I said, yes, really. I mean, Labour's mandate, although the newspapers in July were full of these headlines about landslide victories, it really wasn't. Of course, they won a huge number of seats, but they didn't start from a position of popularity. It wasn't a Tony Blair-style win where the public's largely with
Well, they got fewer votes, didn't they, than under Jeremy Corbyn?
Jeremy Corbyn. They're deeply unpopular. They'd gone downhill. And they didn't even have a honeymoon period, David. What's interesting with Labour now is the infighting is about to start. Because when politicians become worried about their own job, their own seat, they start to blame each other. They start to whisper in corridors and criticising the leadership. And they will absolutely now start to turn on Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. Wes Streeting and Angela Rayner, I'm sure, have a little black book of contacts who'll support them in their leadership bid. And I'm sure they're dusting that off over Christmas and making friendly calls. And expect to see some drama in the coming months.
OK, so just give me a timeline when to buy the popcorn.
I would say from now, but actually make sure you're in your seat with popcorn and a Diet Coke for the results of May's local elections, where Labour are sure to get...
Unless they stop the local elections by saying they're going to be unitary authorities, changing the rules again.
Yeah, now is that legally completed, or is that just being talked about?
I think it's being talked about at the moment. I think the jury is out, but we shall see. Andy, thanks very much. I'm off to buy popcorn. Andy Preston, their political commentator, former Mayor of Middlesbrough.